Okay. Zach, ask the question.
Is fatigue gonna be on the same time?
Okay, the question is, will fatigue, which is on the end of the last PowerPoint, right, from the last test, will this be on test 3? And the answer is yes. Okay, yes. I could have, and I guess if y'all are really adamant about it, I can pull these slides out and make them their own PowerPoint and put it in the exam 3 thing. Ella really wants that. Please do that. Okay, we can do that. It's fine. It's fine. That will help you guys mentally remember what to do. We will do it. Okay. This is a topic that is near and dear to my heart because other than pain, this is the thing that I study. Okay. This is the thing that Ty studies. At the end of class, some of your classmates are going to come up, they don't know it yet, and ask you to be in a study about fatigue that they're doing in the lab. So I watch them panic in their faces all of a sudden. Okay? So we're going to talk today about fatigue. So we're going to learn by doing. Everybody up. Right? Do you want arms or legs? Works for me. All right. Arms out. Don't touch your neighbor without permission. Okay, good. Now, this is fine. We're just going to keep doing this. Okay? We're going to keep doing this. So while you all are doing this, I will talk. I'll ask some questions. Okay, we'll see if we can reach an agreement on what fatigue actually is. Okay, so if I just say very, very generally, okay, what do you think fatigue is?
An inability to complete the task.
An inability to complete a task. Okay, what if you can't start the task? Is that fatigue? All of you were able to put your arms out, right? I can't see some of you in the back, but you got your arms up, okay? Right? So we can argue you weren't fatigued because you could start, but an inability to complete a task, right? Maybe. That's an interesting way to think about things, Sora. Okay? Anybody have another thing? How many of you, if I say fatigue, think sleepy? You think tired, right? You get up in the morning, are you fatigued or are you tired? Let me tell you what not to do. Don't ask the 6.5-year-old if she's fatigued or if she's tired. You can hear the eye roll, okay, that you get on all of those things. Ellis has not done well with the time change, right? It took us like almost a whole week to get on to California time, and we've been back since Friday, and we're not back, okay? How are we doing, guys? Keep your arms up, right? If you put them down, now we've done Soren's thing and you failed the task. Okay? When else do you think of fatigue? Tyler?
In product inhibition and from the HR notes.
In product inhibition. Okay, that's fine.
And then also lack of should be.
You're thinking of mechanistically what's causing the fatigue, and which is good. We're going to get there.
Right? It's like the end of a game. Everybody's like
the end of the game.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Now here's another question, guys. Were you fatigued? No. Abby, don't do that. No circles. Hold them straight. Okay. Don't cheat the blood flow. Don't do that. Okay. See y'all in the back. See y'all. Hiding. Ducking down, putting your arms down. Okay. All right. At the end of the test on Monday, were you fatigued? Mentally fatigued. Is that different than what your arms are feeling right now?
Yes.
How so?
Anger.
Or anger. Or anger. Okay. All right. If you were, all right, stop. Now, if we had you do this physical task after the test on Monday, do you think you could have done as well as you just did? Why?
Mental component.
There's a mental component. How many of you, you know who you are? Some of you quit before we got here with this. That's okay. We got to call it what it is. It's quitting. Okay. Fatigue is quitting. We will learn this in a couple of slides. Right? Okay. I'm on a roll, Fernando. Let me say my thing, and then we'll come back to you. I promise. Okay. Let me cook. Okay. So you mentally chose to stop, right? You could have gone longer. If I had said, I will give you 100 on the next test, you don't even have to show up. Every one of you would have your arms still up right now, wouldn't you? Okay. Those of you that stopped earlier would have been like, no, I can keep going. You made a choice, right? You made a choice to stop. I said, put your arms down. You did. Okay. If we had gone long enough and I had promised enough bonus points and things, do you think you would have gotten to a place where you just couldn't do it anymore? You're as motivated as possible. You are absolutely trying as hard as you can, and you couldn't go anymore. Fear's not sure. Fear thinks he can go for forever. Still have his arms out, right? All day long, arms out. It's all in your brain, right? Okay, y'all can sit. Okay. So, before we do that, Fernando, your question, please. Guys.
No, going to failure, I don't understand it, but like, does this count as the example of the thing, like, I mean, I went till failure, so now my shoulders are gonna grow because I hold now?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Okay. So, physiology is integrated. While you were holding your arms out, how do you get your arms out? What do you have to generate to hold your arms out? Force. Cross bridges. Good. How do we tell those delts and rotator cuff muscles, which I've forgotten, right? Mine, which don't work very well. Side note, anybody wants to feel what impingement in the shoulder feels like? You can come up and I can do this and you can feel the head of my humerus crunch on my acromion process. Too much overhead throwing for many, many years. Cross bridges, force. How do you get the cross bridges to turn on? Where do the action potentials come from? Motor neurons. How do we get the motor neurons to have an action potential? Brain, right? Why did you quit?
Weak.
Okay, well, that's a qualitative assessment. We're not judging. This is a judgment-free zone. Okay. So, right, when we talk about fatigue, we have to generate force to do this, which means we have to voluntarily generate action potentials, motor cortex, cognition to contraction, all of that. As we repeatedly generate force, what are we using? ATP. Where's the ATP come from? That's right, all the pathways. Okay, all the pathways. Whose arms were burning? Okay. Hydrogen ions from the production of lactic acid at the end of glycolysis, being picked up by what are called ASIC afferent receptors, acid sensing ion channels that sense hydrogen, and they cause that burning sensation. That hydrogen also impairs calcium release. It impairs the binding of actin and myosin together. As you guys will see, it screws everything up. That's Tyler's end product inhibition. Do you see why we talk about fatigue now after we've talked about force production, after we've talked about metabolism? Okay. All of the things we've done in class to now work together for this. Okay, for this. So, is fatigue being tired? Everyone say no. It's not being tired. Okay. Sometimes being tired can contribute to fatigue, but it's not the same thing. Okay. Is it a decrease in physical or mental performance? The answer is sometimes. Sometimes. Okay. Then we're going to make two things here that I want to make a distinction on after we define fatigue. Is fatigue different from weakness? Okay. Remember, I was giving Soren a hard time about could you start the task? When you cannot generate enough force to begin a task, right? We call that, physiologically, we call that weakness, okay? You can't unrack 500 pounds on the squat rack, right? Because you cannot generate that much force. We would call that weakness. It's not fatigue, right? You can be as good to go as possible, but you can't generate the initial force. So that in that context is weakness. It's not a qualitative thing. It's not a judgy thing. It's just describing a scenario where we don't get enough force. And then is it different than injury? Okay. Who's been sore? Anybody been sore? Anybody sore right now? A few of you guys, Laney, what's sore? You mind me asking? Your legs, right? Because you're not a pro and you did legs yesterday, right? Or 2 days ago. 2 days. You did legs on Monday because nobody does legs. Lots of squat racks open on Mondays, right? Lots of platforms where you can power clean on Monday because the bros are all benching. Okay, your legs are sore. Good. If you are sore, you have muscle damage. There is an injury. You have obliterated some sarcomeres, which means you cannot generate as much force. If we tested Laney's 1 rep max today, it would probably be less than it was on Monday. Okay. It'll come back in a couple of days, but it's less. That is a particular kind of weakness. It's due to muscle damage, right? Try as hard as you can. You just don't have as many cross bridges. You can't get as much force. It's injury. It's not fatigue. Okay. So there's some interactions. Okay. I'm sure at this point you all want me to shut up and just get to the point of all of these things. We define fatigue as a failure to produce the desired or expected force. Okay? I ask you to raise your arms out to your sides. You could do it. If we held it long enough, or at some point you chose to quit, you cease being able to generate enough force to hold your arms out. Right? You were trying as hard as you could. You desired to generate that force and hold your arm. You can't. Okay? We expect a certain amount of force. You can't generate that force. That's fatigue. Okay? That's fatigue. So we talked about it being different than weakness. We talked about it being different than injury in those particular ways. Fatigue occurs. I can start doing things. I can lift it once, but I can't lift it again. Okay? Or sometimes people get real fussy about all that, but like I can lift it 8 times, I can't lift it a 9. Okay? Very, very often, fatigue is the result of what Tyler and Fernanda mentioned. It's a disruption of metabolic homeostasis. Okay? You're generating force that increases metabolism. Increasing metabolism throws us out of homeostasis and eventually then impairs our ability to generate force. And that's why fatigue is an important concept when looking at training adaptations. If we can induce fatigue, we can very often drive adaptations to limit fatigue the next time we do that. So if we did this as long as we could today, and then we had you guys come back on Friday and do it again, and then do it again next Monday, in a couple of weeks, you could probably do it longer. Okay? Some of that is you train your brain to better tolerate what it feels like. You become less scared. But in other instances, you get better at the motor patterns. You get less physiological disruption of homeostasis, so you can go longer. Okay? Any questions?
Like,
let's say, I was sore this week,
Mhm.
within 3 weeks, I'm doing squat again. And I'm sore, but not as bad, it only lasted 1 day.
Yep.
Is that an adaptation?
That is an adaptation. It is called the repeated bout effect. When you do a bout of exercise that's novel. It's new, or new could be you lift heavier weights than you normally do. It's novel, it's eccentrically biased, so it's a squat, so you've got to go down, right, and do those things. You get damaged, you're sore. You can do the exact same bout. A couple of weeks later, you get half, maybe 2/3 less damage from everything. You can do it with one arm, and you can wait 2 weeks and then exercise the other arm, and you get less damage on that arm than you would have otherwise as well. You learn how to change. The part of my dissertation was studying that was you learn how to change how we recruit motor units. There's also some physical adaptations in the muscle that do those things. Very, very common. Yes. Right? Those are good questions. All right. Now, when we talk of fatigue, we have to say that the origin of fatigue, mechanistically, where is the disruption in homeostasis occurring? Very often gets broken down into two categories. What we call peripheral fatigue and what we call central fatigue. Now, you will note when you look at, I guess this question also needs to be moved. You probably prepared for this question on the last exam. There's a compare and contrast central and peripheral fatigue short answer question, okay? Where the fatigue or where the disruption in homeostasis occurs is going to determine which category of fatigue. Peripheral fatigue, generally, now I will tell you that some people argue very, very vigorously over this. I am not one of those people. It does not matter that much. But peripheral fatigue is generally accepted to be either a failure from the motor neuron downstream. Okay. Some people will say it's the motor neuron downstream. Some people say no, the motor neuron's technically central. It's the axon after the motor neuron and downstream. It really doesn't matter. Okay. It really doesn't matter. So sites can range from action potential propagation in the motor neuron, action potential propagation down the axon, acetylcholine release across the neuromuscular junction, action potential generation in the sarcolemma, especially in the T-tubule, action potential generation, calcium release from the SR, binding to troponin, formation of cross bridges. So it's peripheral, okay? It's peripheral. Central fatigue is generally thought to be, I quit. This is motivation. This is your willingness to continue telling or having your motor cortex send action potentials and things out to keep attempting to do a task. Okay? Psychological factors, motivation, sense of effort, pain, things of that nature are going to play a role. Okay? It involves descending motor pathways, so premotor cortex, motor cortex, spinal cord, maybe not the motor neuron. Okay? But just think brain, basically, brain. During long duration exercise, especially if it's of moderate metabolic intensities, all fatigue is central. Okay? If I told you we're going to go run a mile, and then I tricked you and said, no, we're going to run 2 miles, then we're going to run 3, at some point you could keep going if the intensity was low enough. But you're probably going to be like, I'm done. I'm stopping. Dr. Black's crazy. Screw him. Okay? That's central fatigue. Now, if some of you had your arms out and it's burning and it feels effortful, it feels hard, and you choose because of that to stop, that's also central fatigue. Okay? And I see you. So we're not going to get into it very much, but there is an interaction between these two things. When we get central fatigue, very often the central fatigue is the result of peripheral fatigue also occurring. Okay? When we get peripheral fatigue, whereby in the muscle, we have metabolic byproducts like lactic acid being made, and they signal back and make us feel effortful and it hurts and those things. There's an interaction between these two, and then it in some ways just kind of comes down to which one is the true reason that we stop. Okay? Which one's the true reason that we stop? So,
You answered it.
Okay. okay. So I've tried to put these things on here, and we will try to sort of pick out a couple of these things in the coming slides to talk about the things. But as you can see, basically, brain, spinal cord, that's central. And then we've got the peripheral nerve. So think axon to the junction, to the sarcolemma, T-tubule, calcium release, cross bridges. This area here, sarcolemma, T-tubule, calcium release, that excitation contraction coupling, that's one of the primary places that we get peripheral fatigue. Okay, is sarcolemmal excitability, T-tubule excitability, and calcium release. As you hold your arms out, you are long enough, you will lose the ability to repolarize in your T-tubules and therefore generate action potentials and get calcium to be released. And that may be a reason why you cannot generate as much force. Okay? Does that part make sense, guys? Okay, does that part make sense? Again, all of these things we've covered, but now we're taking those individual structures. We're taking those individual processes and functions where we've only talked about how does it work under normal, the most perfect circumstances. And now we're saying do it over and over and over again. And now shit gets weird and it gets messed up. And that's why you have to stop. That's why you can't just do reps for forever. Okay. That's why you can't run for forever. Well, I'm going to be honest. I got a couple of kids on Ellis's little cross country team that they just run. Wild. It's wild to be like 7 and just go on some of those things. Ellis, on the other hand, lots of central fatigue, lots of lack of motivation. I told y'all that at our last meet, I was trying to encourage her to catch these 2 kids that were ahead of her at the end, and she said, "Shut up, Dad. I don't want to catch them." And I was like, okay, fair. Fair. Can't be that dad, right? Can't be that parent. Don't want to be that little league dad doing those things. But then afterwards, we figured out if she'd caught one of those 2, she would have gotten a ribbon. And she was like, "Oh, I'm gonna catch him next time." So I don't know. Go figure. Kids, man, kids. All right. So there's a list here. We talked about action potential propagation. On the axon, sometimes we can get this, okay? Because of the way axons work, because they have myelin, you have all of these, all of your sodium potassium channels in the axon are at the nodes of Ranvier. And because they're all in one spot or in those several spots, if you get a problem in some place, then it can cause some issues. This is relatively rare, but it can happen. Neuromuscular transmission, so release of acetylcholine from the neuromuscular junction. If you come to the lab, we can induce this. We can use electrical stimulation. We can make the neuromuscular, we can deplete acetylcholine at the neuromuscular junction. In your everyday life, this almost never, ever, ever happens. You can't drive the action potentials at a high enough firing rate consistently. You'll quit before you get there. But this is a thing that we can see in the lab, and maybe it can happen, but it really is pretty rare. This is the big one, okay? Most peripheral fatigue in our everyday lives occurs in excitation contraction coupling, and most of the excitation contraction coupling failure is in the T-tubules. It's in the T-tubules. They're small, they're narrow, there's not enough sodium potassium pumps. We cannot repolarize fast enough if we're getting many, many, many action potentials over and over again. And so when T-tubule fails, calcium release fails. Calcium release fails, we don't bind troponin, we can't run the cross-bridge cycle. Okay? So when this fails, everything downstream also fails. Okay. Now, there are some ions that play a role primarily in all of this. Okay? Calcium levels rise. As you repeatedly contract a muscle, you get calcium being repeatedly released from a sarcoplasmic reticulum. If it gets high enough, we can slow down our ability to pump it back. We swamp the circa pump. Okay. We cannot pull it back into the sarcoplasmic reticulum fast enough, which eventually can mean then that we can't release it again and continue to generate cross bridges. The other big one is hydrogen. Hydrogen is not our friend. Okay, acid is not our friend. When we make lactic acid via glycolysis, okay, it dissociates, we get hydrogen, pH falls. Hydrogen has a wide ranging effect on muscles. Hydrogen ions prevent the depolarization of the sarcolemma. They inhibit directly, okay, the ryanodine receptor. So you cannot release as much calcium from the sarcoplasmic reticulum. It also inhibits the binding of calcium to troponin, and it inhibits the function of SERCA. Okay. Additionally, because this is not enough, it directly impairs the myosin ATPase, which means we can't cleave the ATP back, so we can't recock or go back to our high energy state and continue to run the cross bridge cycle. And if that wasn't enough, the hydrogen also goes back and inhibits PFK in glycolysis and then shuts down the making of ATP. So when I tell you that hydrogen screws everything up, this is what I mean. Okay? If there's ever a question about, hey, I've got peripheral fatigue, what's going on? Your first answer should always be, it's probably hydrogen. Probably due to lactic acid. Okay? On those things. Fernando.
Feed everything in.
Just all of these things. It inhibits depolarization of the sarcolemma. It inhibits calcium release from the sarcoplasmic reticulum. So it inhibits the ryanodine receptor.
Is that not like a muscle cramp? Like you
So
just,
a cramp is a contraction that you can't relax,
like
right?
calcium. not being-
So that is due to releasing calcium or not being able to resequester calcium when we don't want to. We don't have a lot of evidence that hydrogen ions actually cause cramps. Weirdly, dehydration causes cramps. Cramps seem to be due to impairments of the resting membrane potentials and those things more so than the hydrogen. But you're thinking about it in the right way, sure. Okay. Hydrogen, not our friend. And I didn't even mention, and it makes your muscles burn, so you want to quit. Okay. Okay, the last couple of slides, I want to talk about two things that you could argue are peripherally related because they're related to metabolism. But then one of them is also related to central fatigue. When we deplete creatine phosphate, we cannot make enough ATP. We may get to a point where there's not enough ATP to run the cross bridge cycle enough to continue generating our expected force. When you do reps to failure, like say 6, 8, 10, 12, when you're lifting weights or something, that's peripheral fatigue when you get to failure. And it's primarily not lactic acid driven. It's driven by depletion of creatine phosphate. Okay. There's physically not enough ATP to continue generating that much force. So this one could be there. Glycogen depletion is a weird one. You have glycogen in your muscles, you have glycogen in your liver. As we use glucose through glycolysis, either to lactic acid or into the Krebs cycle, we will break down glycogen. If you run and contract or you bike and contract long enough, you can deplete all of the glycogen in your skeletal muscle. Okay? When that happens, you will feel bad. You'll feel bad. Marathon runners refer to it as hitting the wall. It tends to happen at about mile 17, 18, 19. All your muscle glycogen is gone. And you feel bad. In rare instances, you might deplete enough glycogen, and then if you tried to do a high intensity thing after the glycogen was depleted, you might not have enough glucose to do things, but generally the depletion of the glycogen isn't going to cause peripheral fatigue as we think about like creatine phosphate does. But when it's gone, the brain becomes unhappy because it knows The brain needs blood glucose, and we'll talk about this a bunch on Friday when we talk about how we use hormones to control blood glucose. Okay, but the brain can become unhappy. Blood glucose can fall too much because we're having to use blood glucose. We're having to use liver glycogen, which goes into blood glucose. You'll feel shitty. You'll stop. Okay. Anybody ever run a marathon? Anybody run half a marathon? Half's usually not quite enough. Do you feel really bad at the end? Yeah. So half sometimes is usually not enough. You gotta go along. You have about 15 to 1800 kcals of stored glycogen in your muscles. If you assume you spend about 100 every mile that you cover, regardless of how fast you go, it's about 100 calories to walk a mile or to run a mile. Make that make sense, but that's the way it is. So it takes usually 15, 17, 18 miles, right? And you feel bad. Okay, Fernanda, I see you. Let me get through the last slide and we will get there, okay? Central fatigue, as we had said, is things associated with the brain. We get reduced signaling from the brain. One of the best ways if I want to do this is I feed you turkey. You know what's in turkey? An amino acid called tryptophan. Tryptophan leads to the production of something called 5-HT, or what we also know as serotonin. Okay? Serotonin. You eat turkey, your brain serotonin levels go up, and you want to take a nap. Right? We know during exercise, serotonin levels go up. And some of it's good, but other parts can be bad. Also, you get cytokines. Anybody ever had a fever? You've had the flu or something, and you try to exercise, like you didn't even realize you were sick. You try to exercise, and you just feel terrible. Like you cannot go. Okay? You get immune system things, signals like cytokines associated with inflammation that also inhibit the motor cortex. They make you feel shitty. You don't want to exercise. That's on purpose. They don't want you expending energy that we could be using to try to fight off infection or to repair something by going for a run. Okay. The other big one is inadequate blood glucose. People that are hypoglycemic, you pass out. That's central fatigue. Do not contract your muscles. Do not use any more blood glucose so that we deprive the brain of it, right? That's a sort of fight or flight kind of response where we want to make sure that we preserve blood glucose for the brain. The other thing is an inhibition from our muscles. Your muscles hurt, right? You're getting peripheral inhibition and therefore you choose to stop. Okay. Okay. Fernanda, your question. Okay. The last slide is about recovery from all of this. Okay. All of you are probably a little bit fatigued all the time. Okay. Peripheral fatigue has a sort of certain recovery time frame. Central fatigue has a different recovery time frame. Okay. Ionic fatigue. So peripheral fatigue due to disruption of the T-tubules and those things occurs pretty quickly. Within a couple of minutes, usually, we can restore our membrane potentials. Clearing hydrogen and getting pH back to a regular level may take 10 to 15 minutes. Okay? So, ionic stuff, depletion of creatine phosphate that we get when we're doing normal kind of weightlifting and things like that, or sprints, you can rest a couple of minutes and you're pretty good to go. You do stuff where you're running like 800 meters, you're doing things like that, you're going to get a lot of hydrogen, big change in pH, you need to rest 10 or 15 minutes to let that recover. Some of the excitation contraction, some of the other stuff, the ryanodine and calcium stuff may take several hours to several days. If you get muscle damage like what Lainey has, it may take a week. She won't be sore, but her excitation contraction coupling will be impaired from the muscle damage for, I don't know, sometimes up to a week. Okay. All right. We'll stop here. Friday, we'll start doing the hormone stuff. We'll split this off and move it around in Canvas. All right. All right. See you guys then. Please make sure you turn your test in if you don't want to do corrections.
I already added in the T question.
I want to do.